We are talking about the occupation of the Rwandan armed forces on a sovereign territory of the Democratic Republic of Congo. Indeed, we have seen in recent days that this occupation was confirmed on a large part of the city of Goma. As for the number of deaths we are reporting, you will understand that with the volatility of the context, it has been very difficult to quantify this. We regret to note that we are talking about thousands of deaths. Of course, access to the press, access to the authorities has also been limited and put to the test.
This is the journey to One Africa.
Madame la ministre Thérèse Wagner, vous êtes la ministre des Affaires étrangères de la RDC. Merci pour le temps que vous nous accordez ce soir.
Merci pour votre intérêt.
Madame Minister Thérèse Wagner, you are the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the RDC. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your interest. Can you confirm to our viewers, Madam Minister, if the rebels of the M23 took total control of Goma? Do you have an estimate of the number of deaths? First of all, I would like to clarify one thing. When we talk about the situation in the city of Goma, the capital of the territory of North Kivu, we are not talking about the presence of the rebels of the M23. We are talking about the occupation of the Rwandan armed forces on a sovereign territory of the Democratic Republic of Congo. Indeed, we have seen in recent days that this occupation was confirmed on a large part of the city of Goma. As for the number of deaths we are reporting, you will understand that with the volatility of the context, it has been very difficult to quantify this. We regret to note that we are talking about thousands of deaths. Of course, access to the press, access to the authorities has also been limited and put to the test, because we find ourselves in a context of active combat in many areas and of fighting in an urban context, which has made the work extremely difficult. Also for the humanitarians, also for the soldiers of peace. This means that now we are perhaps in a context that will perhaps allow us to better observe the terrible damage of this Rwandan attack on the Democratic Republic of Congo and on the Congolese civilian populations and on the blue helmets of the United Nations and on the soldiers of peace of the SADC. So, until now, we have not seen a total number of deaths. We hope to have better visibility. You understand that it is also very difficult to establish this, when the prevailing context is also dominated by the presence of the M23 and the RDF, who are trying to position themselves as a force that would not have caused damage. So, this is the complex situation we are facing. We are aware of the fact that there are efforts made by the Rwandan armed forces and by the M23 to hide the extent of the brutality with which they besieged the city of Goma. You are talking about a difficult situation. Does your government consider this a failure in the defense of a major city? How do you explain this failure, Madam Minister? How did this happen? It is a situation that we deplore and which also revolts us enormously. What is important is to recognize that for 3 years now, the Democratic Republic of Congo has sounded the alarm bell regarding the M23 and the presence of the Rwandan armed forces. We must not underestimate that there has been a significant effort by the Rwandan armed forces to equip the M23 and its own troops with a military arsenal, never seen before in the Great Lakes region. I would also remember the fact that even the United Nations, with a very strong peacekeeping mission, which is one of the largest on the African continent, itself spoke of the fact that the weapons used by the Rwandan armed forces and by the M23 went well beyond their own capacity. I do not want to ignore the fact that for several months, the Rwandan armed forces have been using a GPS fogging technology, which has made the navigation of the airspace in the north extremely difficult. This would mean that all efforts to supply the military, but also humanitarian supplies and civil aviation, have been completely compromised in a blatant violation of the ceasefire, in a blatant violation of the Chicago Convention. We have always denounced this race, if you will, to the Rwandan armed forces to impose their presence in an extremely brutal way, and to stop all the efforts that have been made by all parties to find a political solution to this situation. We have seen, Madam Minister, the last speech of President Tshisekedi. Is there a strategy to reclaim this territory? Obviously, We will never accept that there are usurpers who try to implant their presence, and therefore we will never accept a cohabitation, if you will, first of all, a cohabitation with Rwanda on our sovereign territory. This was unacceptable. It is a violation, as I always say, of international law, of our sovereignty, and of our territorial integrity. Therefore, the Democratic Republic of Congo does not conceive of staying at all in a situation in which the presence of the Rwandan armed forces and their suppliers of the M23 are part of any normality.
Justement, cette course, si vous voulez, à l'armement que le Rwanda a menée pour justement imposer de manière extrêmement brutale.
Many concerns also circulate according to which the Congolese army would lack support from the government with low wages and low motivation. How do we affect its ability to fight the M23? What do you answer to these allegations, Madam Minister? The President of the Republic, Félix Antoine Tshisekedi Tshilombo, since his accession to power, has made a lot of efforts to improve the situation of our soldiers. We are aware that there is still a lot of work to be done. We are also aware that we come from far away. Previous regimes have invested strategic efforts, if you will, to dismember and weaken the army itself. We must be aware that it is a work in which we must rebuild our army. It is extremely difficult when we face this kind of assault and this kind of attack. The efforts we have made since the beginning of the first mandate of the President of the Republic, and which continue in this second mandate, will continue so that we are better equipped to face these challenges. I fully understand the frustration and concern of many of our fellow citizens, but I would like to reassure you that these efforts will continue, and that we will also learn the necessary lessons from the failures and difficulties we face on the ground to see how to better equip our armed forces, better support them, and defend our sovereign territory with even more efficiency. Madam Prime Minister, we are talking about the Roumains. Did your government hire mercenaries to reinforce these efforts to control this tragedy? It was more of an effort to strengthen the capabilities of our armed forces through trainers, who were recruited outside the country. These efforts were rather consented to, in a logic to strengthen the capabilities of the armed forces of the Democratic Republic of Congo. Let's talk a little about recently we saw that the President Tshisekedi refused to meet regional leaders to negotiate a solution to the conflict. Why? I would like to clarify one thing. When we talk about regional initiatives, I would like to remind you that there is one regional initiative, which was mandated by the African Union, the Continental Organization, which brings together all the African countries. It is the Luanda process. The Luanda process is the only framework through which this solution, this resolution of the conflict, so much hoped for by a political voice, is the only framework in which these discussions should take place. We reiterated the fact that we are waiting for Luanda in the process of Luanda, the process to which he also joined, but from which he separated very recently, and to which he did not participate, for example, at the summit of December 15. I would also like to remind you that the Security Council, all the members of the Security Council, unanimously, and you know that these days it is not always easy to obtain unanimity within the Security Council, but all the members were very clear on this. The parties must return to the negotiating table within the framework of the process of Luanda. This is the position of the Democratic Republic of Congo. We have complete confidence in the facilitator, João Lourenço, President of Angola, and we insist that the seats of the process of Luanda resume in the nearest future. We are perplexed by the fact that Luanda has chosen to stop these efforts. We have also taken note of the fact that the President of Luanda would have requested a mediation of the President of Turkey, President Erdogan. We are perplexed because we are convinced that as Africans who respect each other, we still want to privilege our own efforts. It was quite surprising to see President Kagame request a mediation of a third party that has not participated in these efforts and is not from the continent. We reiterate that the process of Luanda is the only framework through which we will continue the efforts to find a political resolution to this conflict. Do you think, Madam Minister, that you have been, in a way, abandoned by your regional and international allies? 1043. What role should these allies play in the resolution of this crisis, in your opinion? On the contrary, we are not abandoned, we are not isolated at all. 1058. If a party is isolated, it is Luanda. Again, I am referring to the two emergency meetings of the Security Council. through which it was quite visible how Luanda was alone and isolated. All the members of the Security Council have criticized the blatant violation of international law by Luanda. I would also like to remind you that during the last meeting of the Security Council on Tuesday, we had 6 countries that are not directly involved in the conflict, who took the floor, who are not members of the Security Council. We have Uruguay, Guatemala, South Africa, Burundi, Senegal, all these countries that mobilized to take the floor during the deliberations of the Security Council. I think that what we see now is that more and more countries in the world, not only in Africa, are scandalized by Rwanda's attitude, Rwanda's destabilizing attitude, which seems to have the malicious intention of wanting to put Africa back in the dark years of the 90s, when power was being snatched away with weapons. The Democratic Republic of Congo has turned this page. Even if Rwanda is still in a state of mind that considers this kind of option, we will not consider it. We are a country that has made the choice of democracy. We are a country that has made the choice of political alternation. Rwanda has no lesson to teach us by trying to impose its will on a sovereign country with weapons. What we see is not an isolation of the Democratic Republic of Congo. The world is insurging. The world is asking questions about how Rwanda has been able to advance so long and how the world has allowed President Kagame to radicalize for so many decades. We are right. The answer is very clear. President Kagame radicalized because he was uncontrolled, and he has not been held accountable by all his partners and by all his supporters for so many years. We are now in a situation where a head of state seems uncontrolled and obsessed with the intention to destabilize a neighboring country and contribute to the unconstitutional change of a legitimate regime. This is unacceptable, and we refuse that in 2025 Africa, the Africa we want to have, the Africa we aspire to, be an Africa of development, of prosperity, of the future, and of hope for all the generations to come. We categorically refuse that this narrative be imposed on our continent and on our country. Mr. Prime Minister, what is your message to the thousands of Congolese civilians who are now under rebel control? How are you going to help the population that has already fled the city? Are there any follow-up on this? Are they gone? My message, first of all, is that they are not alone. They are not abandoned. They are the reason why every morning everyone gets up in Kinshasa. Everyone gets up in the diaspora. My message is that we are wholeheartedly working with our compatriots in the east of the Democratic Republic of the Congo, in particular in North Kivu. My message is that the efforts we are making are on several fronts. I am at the head of the diplomatic front, and we are making tireless efforts. We will hold all the parties accountable. We will ensure that there is full transparency on those who have spoken and those who have not spoken. We will remind all organizations of their aspirations, of their principles, and of their obligations. We will hold all parties accountable for letting the situation deteriorate in such a way in recent years. We will also remind them that they have a responsibility and an opportunity to take action. My last question. Your government has repeatedly accused Rwanda of supporting the M23, while President Paul Kagame denies any involvement. He continues to deny it. What concrete evidence do you have to support your accusations? Once again, this shows that Rwanda is isolated. Today, there is only Rwanda who claims not to be present in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. 2 days ago, 15 members of the Security Council denounced the presence of Rwanda.
Et contribuer au changement inconstitutionnel d'un régime légitime. Ceci est inacceptable et nous refusons que en 2025 l'Afrique
A few weeks ago, the United Nations expert group published an overwhelming report on more than 4,000 Rwandan troops in the sovereign territory of the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Troops that kill, troops that plunder our natural resources. Because this same report talks about 150 tons of coltan exploited and transferred to Rwanda by the Democratic Republic of the Congo by the Rwandan armed forces and exported to international markets under the label of Rwanda. You can see that there is overwhelming evidence. Even the press in Goma can tell you that there are Rwandan armed forces present. We can also see that Rwanda, once again, in its illusory narrative, is completely isolated. The world is aware that it is now an armed conflict between two states and not an internal armed conflict. This is why our plebiscite urges each other to take responsibility so that those who allowed President Kagame to get so far hold him accountable by cutting, for example, their aid to Rwanda, imposing sanctions on individuals who are directly part of the chain of command, and by revoking in Rwanda the status of country of peacekeeping troops for the UN peacekeeping missions. It is extremely important to underline that in less than 5 days, the Rwandan armed forces in the Democratic Republic of Congo killed 17 peacekeepers, 17, 1 Uruguayan, 1 Malawian, and 15 South Africans. Rwanda is one of the country's largest peacekeeping troops. We are in a context where even this must be revoked as a status. It is unacceptable that a country that contributes to peacekeeping missions is at the same time the cause of the death of peacekeepers. Excellency Thérèse Wagner, I remind you that you are the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the RDC. Once again, thank you for your time.
Alors encore une fois, cela montre justement le fait que le Rwanda est isolé. Aujourd'hui, il n'y a que le Rwanda qui prétend ne pas être présent en République démocratique du Congo. Il y a 2 jours, au Conseil de sécurité, 15 membres du Conseil de sécurité ont dénoncé la présence du Rwanda. Il y a quelques semaines, le groupe d'experts des Nations Unies a publié un rapport accablant qui parle de plus de 4000 troupes rwandaises sur le territoire souverain de la République démocratique du Congo. Des troupes qui tuent, des troupes qui pillent nos ressources naturelles, parce que ce même rapport parle de 150 tonnes de coltan exploités et transférés vers le Rwanda de la République démocratique du Congo par les forces armées rwandaises et exportés sur les marchés internationaux sous l'étiquette du Rwanda. Donc, vous voyez qu'il y a des preuves accablantes. Même la presse qui est sur place à Goma peut vous dire et vous dit clairement qu'il y a des forces armées rwandaises présentes. Donc, nous voyons aussi que le Rwanda, encore une fois, dans son narratif illusoire, est complètement isolé. Le monde est conscient du fait qu'il s'agit maintenant d'un conflit armé entre 2 États et pas d'un conflit armé interne. Et c'est pour cela que notre plaidoyer pousse justement pour que les uns et les autres prennent leurs responsabilités, pour que ceux qui ont permis au président Kagame d'en arriver si loin le tiennent redevable, en coupant par exemple leur aide au Rwanda, en imposant des sanctions sur des individus qui, eux, directement font partie de la chaîne de commandement, et en suspendant ou en révoquant au Rwanda le statut de pays contributeur de troupes de maintien de la paix pour les missions et les opérations de paix des Nations Unies. Il est extrêmement important de souligner qu'en moins de 5 jours, les forces armées rwandaises présentes sur le territoire de la République démocratique du Congo ont tué 17 soldats de la paix, 17, un Uruguayen, un Malawite et 15 Sud-Africains. Le Rwanda est un des pays les plus grands contributeurs de troupes de maintien de la paix. Et donc nous sommes dans un contexte aussi où même cela doit être révoqué comme statut. Il est inacceptable qu'un pays qui contribue aux missions de maintien de la paix soit en même temps la cause de la mort de soldats de la paix.
Excellence Thérèse Wagner, je rappelle que vous êtes ministre des Affaires étrangères de la RDC. Encore une fois, merci pour le temps que vous avez accordé.
Merci à vous.
Eux-mêmes, soit ils passeront par leurs valets locaux qui sont ici,